All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Our World Today, the Unionist Perspective weekly live discussion. We're very happy to be with you today. And we have a pretty jam-packed program yet again. We're going to talk a little bit about lethal autonomous weapons and what the future and impact of their development is going to cause for everybody involved and the country's reaction to their development. And then we're going to go a little bit into geopolitics, talking about Tel Aviv and the protest that is happening there. If we have time, we're going to talk a little bit about sports and the status of trans athletes and just, overall like cultural events that we want to mention. But first of all, we're going to talk about lethal autonomous weapons. We've had this in the bag, well, as a topic that we wanted to explore. I'm not sure if this is the right expression, but as a topic that we wanted to explore for the past 2 weeks. However, it was a little bit it's a little bit of a heavy topic if we don't like take it by the from the right side of things. So Granville has been the one doing most of the research for this, and I would like you, Granville, to kind of explain, first of all, what are lethal autonomous weapons, and then maybe we can have a discussion, like questions, answer from there. But yeah, what are lethal autonomous weapons, basically?
Yeah, cool. So thank you. Yeah. So lethal autonomous weapons are weapons that can be used to identify and then also used to engage targets without human control. So in essence, what we have seen in all these weird and wonderful sci-fi movies and everything else, think of the drone that's flying over something, and as opposed to a surveillance thing, in terms of watching, it's actually able to destroy a target very by itself. So there are parameters coded into the system. So the system actually makes its own decisions. That's where the autonomy comes in, that it doesn't require input from a human being to say, okay, we agree that's the target, do something in terms of maybe immobilizing the target or reducing its ability to target other people or destroy it completely. So it's literally a machine-based decision that will run very automatically. So, we have the sense of sometimes we do things because we are running these automatic programs that we don't know what is influencing our decision making. We just have these patterns and we just behave in a certain way until somebody says, hey, stop. Think about why you're doing that. What is leading you to do that? What is influencing how you feel so that you behave in that way? This literally takes that concept of programming and puts it in a weapon that could be very destructive if it's not managed properly, if there are no rules inside the system that says you can't go to that extent or go to this extent but stop and wait for further instruction. This can act on its own, basically almost the way a human being would without a human being's input.
Yeah. And so now that we know that, like, how have countries, I guess, like the United Nations and different countries have been taking a stance on lethal autonomous weapons for a few years now, but like the discussion is like intensifying right now. So can you tell us what is happening and what is the discussion being had at the moment?
So, interestingly enough, this discussion has been taking place since 2014.
Mhm.
So at the time, the United Nations decided to establish a group of governmental experts from various countries to join almost an exploratory body to understand the implications of developing these kind of systems and then deploying them in various places, but also then using them. So usage is a very important thing. And so the United Nations group of government experts is also subject to something called the Convention on Conventional Weapons. And that's basically what we would know as normal weapons, so guns, tanks, those kind of things. There are laws governing the extent to which they can be used. The limitation of damage is something that is covered in those conventions. There's international law that governs when they can be used, under what circumstances. And so this group of government experts is trying to establish that kind of regulation of autonomous weapons and semi-autonomous weapons, because all of them will not be automatic. So for instance, a semi-autonomous weapon would be something that is triggered like a landmine. If you stand on a pressure plate, that is what triggers action from the landmine. It's not that the landmine just decides to go off on its own unless there are potentially other environmental factors that influence it. With lethal autonomous and semi-autonomous weapons, there's much more of a potential for them to act independently. So there's many countries that are proponents to saying it needs to be regulated. The Secretary General of the United Nations is saying we need to actually just prohibit its development altogether, while not prohibiting the development of advancements that could probably secure countries more and things like that. So things like AI that's very adaptive and learns quite quickly are starting to be a concern, because machine learning that outpaces human learning could be the result of, well, could result in a lot of unknowns and a lot of uncertainties and probably a lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we know for a fact that definitely the fear and the question is are these machines going to be making like irrational decisions, and what ways are they going to be used and things like that? So has there been any regulations yet put into text for that, or is it just still a lot of discussions and questions right now?
So at this point, it's a lot more discussion, a lot more research on the potential implications of machine learning and introducing machine learning into weapon systems that could have dire consequences. So there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of debate, but there's also a great call from many countries around the world to say we have to regulate it much more stringently before this thing gets ahead of us and itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so thank you for that. I think it was really interesting to have your summary on this. So, Isaiah, did you have something that you wanted to say on this topic or things like that?
I didn't. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Oh no, not before you guys.
No, yeah. So I just wanted to basically ask a question. Now we can like go deep into like discussion and kind of debating like the pros and the cons. So do you feel like there's any pros to having this type of machine? Like, and yeah, I'm just like, I feel like since it's weapons, like there's already like a bad stigma on it with reason. So, like, would there be any pros to having automated machines there, according to you?
I feel like there an interesting thing in the article that Granville shared was about nuclear weapons and how the United States military and government started developing them in the 1940s or a little earlier. It began, and other countries quickly caught on, like the Soviet Union started developing their own, and then the weapons just proliferated for 20 years, like 2 decades, and kind of just built up. And so the threat only increased, of that like weapon of mass destruction, right? Until there was any sort of treaty made, right, to limit nuclear weapons. So I feel like this is kind of one of those things where countries are trying to develop something in order to like get an edge on any other countries or groups, that could be like threatening and everything like that. And it's understandable on one hand because like if assuming like a country is fighting for a just cause, like for example in World War II, back to that, like the US's use of nuclear weapons ended up being decisive in Japan's surrender. It wasn't, obviously it may not have influenced Germany or anything like that, but it was part of it. So like you could argue that like the development of new unregulated weapons, was important then, and it ultimately contributed to a good cause that saved the world from a lot of suffering, that was World War II, right, in the Pacific. But like now we have this whole like the threat of nuclear war, that now all this energy needs to go into that, into managing it, into preventing it, and it's all it is it's pretty much just a deterrent. And like major powers are basically at a stalemate because neither of them really would want to use weapons that horrible.
Mm-hmm.
So like, if you know what I mean, so if the lethal autonomous weapon systems ended up becoming something like that, it would end up just adding a lot of headache to everyone. Every government and military would have to invest so much energy just in counteracting this. But it's something that it doesn't have like cataclysmic um, uh, effects potentially like a nuclear weapon, but it has potentially, like, I feel really insidious effects of like these systems operate independently based on AI. And like, we know that in the rush to like get the technological edge on other countries, things could be made imperfectly with some flaws. People's biases could come through just like they've come through with AI. In so far, right? In like AI has a lot of biases, that just come through. And the same exact thing I feel like you could say will happen with the lethal autonomous weapon systems. Any like issues in the consciousness of the people designing it would be translated into it directly. So, and it just leads to a huge potential ballooning of like civilian casualties and like collateral damage that's like not acceptable. Humans can cause that too, though. So, but I feel like what the potential for this is just an amplification of what we already have. Like the human error, the biases, the upsets in human consciousness is just an amplification of that. So essentially, I feel like spiritually, we'd be dealing with almost the same thing, except with the concept of like humans trying to like distance themselves from it or like automate it, because they don't want to use as much manpower. I guess the only pro would be that you can do more with fewer people because you don't need a person involved. But like, I
Yeah.
don't know. So yeah, that's what I felt about it.
The
So
thing that I feel about it is from everything that we've discussed, and basically that pro of having the humans kind of distanced from making the decisions, even though it doesn't, it will kind of be the same in terms of like biases and errors in terms of war, is it's going to be a pain in terms of justice. The before, during, and after like a conflict, to say like, okay, whose responsibility was this, and how do we frame this? Who is being judged? Who is judging? And what are the consequences? And I feel like, I don't know, there is, I don't know how to articulate this, but I feel like there is a good way to use like autonomy in weapons when this is like clearly defensive. Like, for example, we have some like satellite shields. Like some countries have satellite shields. For example, Israel, Singapore, United States, Malaysia, that they use in order to just like automatically revert attacks from other countries, which is good because it prevents and reduces human damage and, civilian casualties. But for weapons like that, I feel like including machine learning into something that has the potential to cause any form of violence, even when testing, is kind of, I don't know, it seems weird to me, but we are in that chokehold of an economical and geopolitical system that Sage, I think, described well, where if you don't research and invest into that learning, you're going to be considered late in terms of development to other countries and even to your allies. And there is this, I don't know, it's like just, it feels like this, ever since the Cold War, we are in a territory of like weapon escalation that we don't use, but that we invest in just in case someone else is going to attack. And I feel like it feels so bad to me, to be honest. It feels like a mix of potentially like the worst of our economy system um, and our defense system that we have inherited from the end of World War II and Cold War. And it's like, yeah, we must, just in case someone else decides to attack, like North Korea, or China, that has been like the biggest threat to like an impending nuclear war. We need to invest in it. And it doesn't feel good to do that to me. Like it feels so very bad, but also I understand that as a country right now, what is your choice but to follow like other people and even your allies so that you're not late to some sort of research and development about weapons. But it feels that's the first time in a long time in our discussion that I feel like super bad about something. And I think it's because I don't think we have explored much healing in that space yet. But there must be a solution. But the solution must be found through healing and seeing an entirely new way that the thing of a spectrum of refusing to invest in it and being late and underdeveloped, and being in it, but being developed, but also escalating risk of conflicts because you're in it and you're being developed. So I don't know what can be the beginning of a healing answer there, according to you guys, because I feel like maybe we must at least try to question ourselves about something like that.
So I feel like something that's probably at the core of it and at the core of your answer, of your question, is what we've spoken about quite a few times, is the respect for human life and the respect for human dignity and, just honoring life in the first place. So anything that develops to the advancement of humanity must also not have the potential backdoor of being detrimental to humanity. And I think that's probably the discomfort for me, is that we don't know what we don't know, and we don't yet know enough about this topic. And I almost feel like the not knowing is the discomfort. That's where the niggle is, because I mean, if you just look at how algorithms are built in terms of things like social media, and people are then profiled based on their likes, and they see certain things based on those profiles. And then you have that same machine learning going into a system and learning that these types of people are potentially not to be trusted, and fueling that learning with more of the same could very well lead to people being targeted based on profiles, and not necessarily based on their actions or the circumstances in which certain things play out. So like under war circumstances, how does this thing understand that, for instance, just because somebody's not as fair as somebody else, or because they're wearing sunglasses, that they're not a threat, those kind of things, because it's almost, it's open to weird and wonderful interpretations, because we don't necessarily completely understand how machines learn and will learn. We are learning along with our technology, but there is a potential that, because technology can outstrip the pace at which we think, it could outstrip the pace at which we understand it.
I think you mentioned, I think there's an element of, for me, like some of the uncomfortable feeling was that basically it would be viewed as weak to say no. But I think in what you mentioned and how you illustrated it, I think there is some power to saying no to that weapon and saying, as a country or as a group of countries, we will not accept the direction where things go. And I think most of the time we feel powerless to boundaries, we think they're just like weakness. And I think with the history of conflicts that we've had on Earth, I think most people think that the power is in just being super military advanced, and there is a lot of power to it, I agree. But there is also power to saying, like, this is not the direction we will take as a whole. And I think if you say that as a country, I think you have way more power to kind of stop this economy of lethal autonomous weapons altogether, or at least reduce it a lot to like a minimal. And I think maybe right now what you were expressing with like the uncertainty is that a lot of people feel like they're overwhelmed by it and they don't know, even the United Nations, we don't know how to handle this. But I think in saying no, you kind of start to understand the beginning of an answer to it. And that doesn't mean that you won't invest in the research of it, but it feels way better. And there's something else also here about, I guess, let's take an example, like for example, in music, like we're seeing the rise of AI a lot. And there's something where I feel like AI and machine learning cannot replace the human eye for certain. Like, for example, a rhythm is very human because a rhythm can be just a tad bit late or a tad bit early if a human say does it. But if a computer does it, it's always going to be very like quantized as musicians would say. And a lot of music is absolutely wonky and bizarre and just like evolutive in that sense. I swear. And I think this is at least one a case where AI will never replace completely a human touch. So there is a need for a human to still be behind the computer to kind of help it along on things like that. And I think this opens a new question as well for this new system that we're discovering in lethal autonomous weapons, where it's like, yes to autonomy, maybe, but where is the place of human beings in there? And, controlling weapons from a distance, wasn't it like already something that we did? So how is that going to change? Like, are military chefs going to be replaced by military people, but that are programmers? So that the machine learning can be so fast that it can reduce errors and human costs and infrastructure costs. And I think if we start asking the right question, it's going to, I guess, be much easier, in my opinion. But I don't know how you guys feel about it. Maybe you have something, you're thinking differently about this, but that's my feeling on it.
I don't know. I feel like if we were to say like just like stop all research on it, at least like for example in the United States, I would feel like that would not be a good thing because I feel like, there's always value in developing some stuff defensively, like for defensive capabilities, or because yeah, like you would never want like a country or a group of people who has just nefarious intentions to like outpace you militarily. I mean, you just wouldn't want that. I feel like that wouldn't be a loving thing to do, contrary to like, there's a big like pacifist voice maybe that would just say like no to anything in terms of weapons development. But I feel like it's important to remember that like it's okay to defend yourself and to counteract people who act with, you know, yeah, like evil intentions. So, um, yeah, I just don't know, but yeah, it reminds me of the class, the Twin Flame Ascension School, where Jeff and Shaleia talked about the killing of Osama bin Laden as being a boundary because he was so determined to just like cause death and destruction and spread hatred. Like that was his whole thing, that the only way to communicate to him, like, hey, stop doing that, was literally through, bullets, because he wouldn't listen to anything else. And so that's why, it's important to have. That's why the whole like military industrial complex isn't like just totally evil and nefarious. Like, and I feel the need to say that. It's something that we would probably take for granted, but I just feel the need to say that because it's something in consciousness where people debate still. And so I don't know, but yeah, but for me, if I was like US government is deploying lethal autonomous weapons, I would feel a little bit uneasy about that because I'm like, are you sure that your AI technology is like competent enough and good enough to like not cause so much collateral damage and hurt a bunch of people like who you don't intend to? So yeah, I don't know. That's all I feel with it.
I feel like you've touched on something important. So, like, we understand that there are instances where you have to speak the language of the aggressor. And under certain circumstances, that language is violence. I also have to agree with you that there's a sense, and both of you shared it, you and Yureen shared it, in terms of where does that kind of continuum or spectrum of autonomy end? So part of the debate has been one of the key factors is human involvement, but also an absolute ability to turn off any lethal autonomous weapon systems, because that you know, if it learns to the extent that it can keep itself going indefinitely, there is a challenge. So you kind of need to build in safe, you know, your fail safes. Literally, you have to build in fail safes. And so I agree with you that there has to be a level of capability to defend yourself, but I feel like that's what's at the core. The core of it is that within humanity, we still have a trust wound. And so, because we have the trust wound based on what has happened in our history, we're always going to want to fortify certain things so that we aren't caught caught off guard. You know, it's that old English adage, you don't want to be caught with your pants down kind of thing. So this is literally, you don't want to be caught defenseless, but you only really want to be able to defend yourself because there is a certain lack of trust in the system.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I feel better from having laid out the points here. Because I think most of the time we would see like it's called lethal. So obviously like this is not something that people are going to take lightly. This is sensitive. This is it hints at something negative in the mind of people. But it's just his name. And I would say that even though it's his name and we're kind of fearful of and not really like trusting AI just yet, which is like normal. There is a discussion to be had there. There is definitely a discussion to be had there, and there is a discussion to be had on what it says about our society, what it says about our development, and how can we use it in a way that is good? I think like most AI things, even though this one is like pretty heavy because this is definitely with the involvement of war, you know, AI has its good side and its, I would say, bad side, not so good side. But we also have to trust that, you know, I guess the discussion is very because our government are not taking this lightly. maybe we're taking it a little bit on the fear side, which is normal. I think all of us would do that, but there is also room for improvements. And since technological improvement is exponential, like it doubles every year, this is like something that is proven. It also can lead to something that maybe isn't perfect right now, but developed in, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, maybe it could lead to something interesting that is also like kind of a cooperation between human systems and, machine systems. And I think we can compare it to like the conquest of space, Space is like a pretty dangerous place. And so if you send someone to space, you have to have all kind of system fail-safe put in place. And I think maybe what you were hinting at, Grenville, was that if we put enough like fail-safe on something, it may just work. And there's still like a question mark on this. But it puts a new perspective to something that can be negatively felt by every one of us. Like I think every one of us is like maybe not trustworthy, not trusting, sorry, trusting of a new technology that can involve like some kind of violence. So yeah, that was just like the conclusion of how we can view this. Even though it's not perfect, it's definitely like a step towards, hey, maybe it's a step towards something new that we don't know about in terms of like managing weapons and managing the military, managing human involvement as well, which could be interesting. And I just want to,
Jorien, I think just
Sorry.
another thing, and it could be could very much be an argument for lethal autonomous weapons, because in doing that, you can then also limit the human casualties for soldiers under those circumstances. So, there are definitely pros and cons, as you mentioned that when we started. And I think, while there is a fear factor to it, we also need to remember that we are naturally advancing people and we naturally want to expand. And so we mustn't stand in the way of expansion, but we do need to educate ourselves quite thoroughly, well, as thoroughly as we possibly can, in the drive for expansion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. It's like sometimes you make decisions in an infrastructure or a system of government, and you know that there is going to be like pros and cons. And so, less human involvement, like cons, jurisdictionally, like what is going on there? But pros, maybe less PTSD from being on terrain for soldiers. So yeah, that's definitely something, if that can like, improve lives for people, that may be something worth exploring, as long as it's not like multiplying the casualties on the land, for civilians. And I just want to take this opportunity to transition into our next topic, because I think being trusting of someone or something in times of conflict is definitely a question that is being posed around the world right now, and for Israelis especially. And so Sage and Isaiah researched this topic about tens of thousands of people in Tel Aviv protesting, because they're like, okay, what is the goal of this war with Hamas? Where are the hostages? Like, there are only a few that were liberated a few months ago. And if is this war like actually like doing anything. So, Isaiah and Sage, would you like to talk a little bit about that and explain to us the situation there?
Yeah, so yes, recently in Tel Aviv, in Israel, there were protests involving, upward of 10,000 people. Yes, maybe tens of thousands, calling for the resignation of, Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister of Israel, on the basis of, the war, the Israel-Hamas war, has been going on for 6 months now. There are still estimated to be 129 hostages held by Hamas, and people cooperating with them. The hostages are thought to be kind of like scattered throughout Gaza among like different militant groups, different Hamas people, and sometimes even just families, just people, holding hostages. And obviously we know like the stories from hostages who have been freed or escaped or whatever have been just absolutely terrible. And so people are in Israel are growing increasingly angry about that, and thus some are demanding, yes, Netanyahu's resignation over that. Whether or not that would actually happen is a big question. I guess anything could happen, like maybe. I've heard some people speculate that the bigger threat to Netanyahu's government is actually disagreement in the far right, the right wing politically of the country, because of the question of whether or not to say that I don't remember the name of the people who study the Torah. Like there's a program in Israel where people can like just study the Torah. And historically, they've had an exemption from military service because of that. In fact, they even say that them studying the Torah contributes to the defense of the country, which I found to be interesting. That definitely piques curiosity. But now some people are saying, no, let's end that exemption because we need more people. So that could be a greater disturbance, I guess, to Netanyahu's government than this, which is an interesting statement about like what has the most power in the country. But it just brings up a lot of questions like, what is Netanyahu's goal here? Is freeing the hostages his number one priority? How stable is his hold on the government right now and everything like that? And also, just what is the Israeli population's view on like what's going on in Gaza, like with all the people, like 33,000 people, have been killed in Gaza so far. And they are trying to negotiate a hostage release deal with Hamas. It was going to be, I believe, so different sources said different things. It was either a ceasefire for 40 women, children, and like elderly men or sick men, or hundreds of Palestinian prisoners in exchange for that same thing. But the current state of that negotiation is Hamas is like, well, we don't have 40 women, children, or elderly sick men. Like, we literally don't have them. We either can't find them or they've died or been killed, which people weren't aware of that was the case. So Israel's saying, well, then just replace the rest of the 40 that you can't find with like young men, like do something to like satisfy this agreement so that there can be a ceasefire. But Israel's already withdrawn a lot of troops though, but not all of them as well. So I don't know, maybe to help the negotiations move along. So I see it as just like a very sad situation. But hopefully we can bring clarity to this as much as possible and just really see what's going on here. Yeah, that's what I have on it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a a great summary of what is happening. I would say, first of all, we mustn't forget because sometimes we get our heads so into a conflict that we forget like what was announced at the beginning. Israel is very, very, very protective of their civilians. So it was already announced, like at the beginning of the war, that it was not going to be pretty. It's been pretty ugly, yeah, and I think it definitely is too much, but it's part of their consciousness and message to just like lives, like one life is so important and we're going to fight for all of them and things like that. How Netanyahu is handling that is probably questionable. And then I think how the Israelis see this. So you do have to remember, like I think at the end of 2022, there was already a protest in Israel that we talked about here. And this protest at the end of 2022 was about Netanyahu, basically, and if he was going to resign already. So I think people are already not content with it, but I don't think it means that they're realizing. I think they're still on the side of, hey, we gotta defend ourselves, or maybe even for some of them, like we were here first, so we are entitled to this war. But I think how well this war is going in terms of freeing the hostages is what is really a question here. So I don't think there's this necessarily a questioning on the lives of Palestinians for a lot of them, which is kind of sad because I think this is kind of the goal of the government to pursue this until like they have, even if they didn't pursue well, like to pursue this until they have all of the stages. But like the population can definitely like question themselves on it, but they don't have a terrain to kind of have this discussion right now because the consciousness is very into like, Israelis like have been victim and persecuted, and sadly they're still persecuted. Like there are still like horrifying things that happens to people just being Jews since the beginning of this conflict. So it's complicated for both sides. And then this thing about like people studying the Torah, it is a real problem, because first of all, like there is a history of, because they were persecuted in the Holocaust, the culture is like do not question people for what they choose, and you cannot suppress the voice of people, of any Israeli person. So very protective inside of their nation of what people have to say. But I think it's kind of turning and changing since there is this political debate. And these people that study the Torah for life, they're exempt of military service. They're also exempt of working. And the problem is that they constitute 40% of the population. That's a lot. 40% of the population of Jews. And yeah, it's just like, questions. But I think also trying to revoke their life goals of like studying the Torah, whether it's for studying or for like avoiding military service, is kind of a sign of maybe a little bit of desperation on what to do for Israel. And again, I said like we knew this was not going to be pretty. However, like, I don't know. Yeah. I wish there could just be like people just saying like quit. We call it the past and just like cohabit, but it's not what most people, either Palestinian or Israelis, actually want. And because of that, like there's been like basically an open prison camp of Gaza for so long, and you cannot, like, in good conscience, just walk in here as an Israeli and just say like, hey, we have warrant to search for people that we need, because you haven't created that terrain of discussion. But also Hamas hasn't created that terrain of discussion either. So the choices of each of them are blocking this conversation. And so I feel, even though Netanyahu is just like, even if it was a crazy cuckoo, I think it's just a mirror of the choices of people, which is, I guess I would join Sage in saying that this is very sad, that, and as long as we are in, like, I own the land, you get out, or you own the land, I get out, or kill every last one of them, or we're different, I don't think there is going to be any change made. But yeah, and I rarely say this, but like, I don't know, what would be the solution for you? Do you see a solution here? Or do you see only like blocks for now? Because I see blocks.
And that is the concern for me. It feels super messy, but I feel like the messiness is a lot of grandstanding. So yes, there are principles that we support and we're fighting for, but it's almost as if the principles are being used as a defense for bad behavior and not a desire to find common ground, to find a reasonable solution. Because it's literally these two almost immovable forces not giving an inch. And so when you start to hear that there's this almost conditions to be met for a ceasefire to even be considered, it kind of just says to me, well, somebody, it almost feels like we're going to fight until the last breath in both of us, kind of thing. It literally feels like that kind of situation. And I think it almost feels a little bit like a choice of insanity. Because I'm not finding true sense in what is happening. It feels very, very obnoxious. It feels like there's just no desire to find a solution.
Yeah, and I feel like all this protesting from the Israeli populace reflects that there's a question, and I don't know the answer for sure to the question, but it's that, is what the Israeli government is doing in Gaza the most effective way to get the hostages back? And I feel like I feel like what's been happening is pointing toward no, because rather than as targeted, high intelligence and operation as possible to get the hostages back, and rather than quickly trying to make a deal, it seems like the emphasis has been more on, let's eradicate Hamas. And in the process, if we cause a lot of human casualties, who cares, frankly, slash, they're not civilians, they're all militants. Like, there's that mentality which I can't fail to mention. It's just seems it's like it seems like they're kind of putting the cart before the horse. Because if you're saying, okay, our goal now is to eradicate Hamas, but then you also want to get hostages back, if you're trying to eradicate Hamas, Hamas is not going to want to negotiate with you and give you the terrorists back. I think the idea is that if we put enough pressure on them, they'll be like, okay, let's make a deal, enough. But clearly Hamas has not had that mentality. And Hamas they're in one of the most densely populated areas, in the world, like definitely in the area. So they just kind of hide behind all the people there, Hamas does. And they don't seem to care. They don't care for all of what their rhetoric. In fact, the more the Gaza war rages on and the more people die, the more ammunition Hamas has for its rhetoric, right, against Israel. And now it has more grievances against Israel, which it can then weaponize for people who will listen to them and be like, you're right, let's destroy them. So to me, I feel like Israel military may be playing into Hamas's hand by doing this rather than trying to do the most targeted, low casualty invasion operation possible to like get the hostages back, and then they could deal with the whole eradicate Hamas thing in some way, because clearly they don't want Hamas to keep existing, and I feel like that's true. Like, you don't want Hamas to keep existing, but it just doesn't seem like the priority is on those human lives of the hostages. It seems like it's on, let's just flatten the place and hopefully Hamas comes down in the process. I'm just
It's
like,
on
I know this.
eradicating Hamas, yeah.
I'm
Sorry.
sorry.
It's on eradicating Hamas. I feel like what Netanyahu said at the very beginning was bad, and I think his fast operation to try to retrieve the hostages in the first weekend was both like an attempt to try to find them before they get into the maze that is Gaza, where Hamas is like kind of yeah, but also like the more like we do damage to Hamas, like maybe the more pressure it puts on them, and the more like we can eradicate them. And I think it changed, and I think that's why he hasn't stopped and regrouped. And I think that's why it's difficult for other countries to intervene, because it's like even if we force them to have a ceasefire, it's going to start again in the same way, because Hamas and Israel are making the same choices, and they haven't been able to kind of autocorrect by themselves because they don't want to. And I think also that this thing of eradicating Hamas, like, I don't know. I don't know. I feel like he went head first. I don't know if it felt like so powerless to having information through his intelligence that he went head first into it. It seemed like it was bad because it was like Hamas is going to hide behind civilians anyway, so we don't have intelligence. Let's just use brute force right away. And we're seeing that it cost him. Like people were like, even the US were like, all right, try. We're not sure, but try. And it's not working. And I think that's just it. And I think it's just like this unwillingness to change from both sides that is just like unnerving to watch. And yeah, sorry, you can have a definitely the last point if you wanted to add something to that.
I just felt like, I know this discussion could seem maybe insensitive, or like just upsetting. It's going to upset and bring up upsetting emotions, but I feel like you can't have a discussion about this that negates or discounts like any of the people do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's important to like really examine it even-handedly. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you because I feel like the obstinance that they're being very obstinate, but they are using a very principled approach that they can weaponize. And that is the concern. The concern is when you appeal to that hurt in people, that hurt can be weaponized. And when you weaponize that hurt, you have the potential to have significant amounts of blunt instruments at your disposal.
Yep. And to finish that point, I would say that weaponizing the hurt on either side has caused people to mention genocide on either side all throughout the world. And this is a very, very dangerous way of thinking, and one that I say no to, because what the heck? Like, Every human is like, you cannot just casually talk about a group of people and eradicating it in order to have another group of people being freed. This is not the way. And yeah, once we stop weaponizing the hurt, and once we lose our pride and do new choices, I think maybe we can have some sort of like substantial discussion. But that is all for today. That was a pretty big, heavy discussion, heavily packed. Thank you to everyone who stayed with us, watched us live, or watched us on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any comments to make on it, definitely comment and like this video. Share it if you want us to continue doing this kinds of format. And yeah, we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.